Welcome to The Explainer. We're skipping the usual agenda today because we're jumping right into the deep end. We're looking at the exact mechanics of a high-stakes shadow war between a Silicon Valley billionaire and a massive media empire. This is a story of raw power, strategy, and a plot that played out over nearly a decade.
Okay, listen to this. A little fire is quickly trodden out, which being suffered, rivers cannot quench. It's Shakespeare, right? And it absolutely sets the strategic tone for our entire analysis today. What's so crucial here is how a tiny, seemingly insignificant personal conflict, a really small transgression, can ignite an unstoppable, destructive force if it's just left alone. Today, we're going to see exactly how a single spark grew into an absolute inferno.
So, to really understand how this happened, we're leaning on our foundational source, Ryan Holiday's fascinating book, Conspiracy. We are going to completely decode the strategy behind the shadow campaign. And look, we're not taking sides here. We're just going to impartially map out the exact Machiavellian mechanics of this modern-day plot, step by step, so we can see how power is actually wielded behind closed doors.
Let's get into Section 1, the inciting incident.
You know, grand conspiracies, they almost never start with some massive movie-style explosion. They start small, really small. In late 2007, a gossip blog called Valleywag published a piece by Owen Thomas with a pretty blunt headline. It was roughly 400 words long. A tiny piece of internet gossip. But that specific article was the exact spark that set this whole decade-long saga into motion. See, the subject of the article, Peter Thiel, his sexuality was an open secret among his peers in Silicon Valley. But he deeply valued his privacy. He absolutely did not want his complex professional identity boiled down to a single sensational headline.
But then you have Valleywag's parent company, Gawker, and they operated on a completely different wavelength. Their entire journalistic ethos was literally news without access, favor, or discretion. It was built by its founder, Nick Denton, on a foundation of radical transparency, shock value, and basically democratizing gossip. To the Gawker team, open secrets were just hypocrisy, and they saw it as their job to expose them, no matter who it upset.
Which brings us to Section 2, the billionaire versus the publisher.
When you look at these two guys side by side, you realize this clash wasn't a fluke. It was an inevitable collision. On one side, Peter Thiel. He holds this deep, foundational belief in privacy, viewing media exposure and social shaming as literal threats to unorthodox thinking and innovation. And on the flip side, Nick Denton, a guy who championed radical transparency, despised hidden elite circles, and believed exposing them was a public service. These are two massive intellects, both incredibly successful, with completely opposite philosophies on what the public has a right to know.
Now, a true conspiracy? That requires immense patience. This wasn't some hot-blooded overnight Twitter feud. Look at the timeline. The inciting incident happens in 2007. Throughout 2008, Gawker's coverage actually escalates, right when Thiel's hedge fund is taking massive hits on the market. But it isn't until 2011 that a pivotal secret meeting in Berlin takes place. That is an agonizingly slow timeline. It takes incredible restraint and long-term calculation to wait that long.
Because what happened between those dates wasn't just random anger. It was a careful, calculated anatomy of intrigue. Thiel was slowly moving from a place of raw grievance to strategic plotting. He wasn't just trying to figure out how to throw a punch. He was figuring out how to completely dismantle his opponent.
Moving to Section 3, calculating the costs. This is the phase where the aggrieved party has to step back and weigh their options. I mean, you don't launch a decade-long shadow war just because your feelings are hurt, right? To explain exactly why Thiel felt compelled to fight back, our source breaks down his cold calculus using Thucydides' ancient maxims: fear, honor, and self-interest. Thiel feared that an inaccurate Gawker story could derail a massive Facebook IPO or cost his data company Palantir a major government contract. He felt his honor was being publicly dragged by an entity he'd basically viewed as a bully. And ultimately, it was in his self-interest to protect his capital from a chaotic, unpredictable media wildcard.
And we're talking about a massive financial threat here. How massive? Try $1 billion. That is the estimated financial threat Gawker posed to Thiel's overarching business empire. By mathematically framing it like this, Thiel was looking at the huge negative expected value of doing nothing. If there's even a 20% chance Gawker could cost him $1 billion, well, suddenly spending a few million to stop them makes very logical financial sense.
Section 4, the failure of normalcy.
Before diving into the shadows, Thiel actually tried to resolve this the normal way.
He made the standard, socially acceptable attempts to make the problem go away, which leads us to a really stark question. What do you actually do when the normal playbook fails? Because that moment right there, that's the exact moment the conflict shifts from standard diplomacy into the realm of shadow warfare.
And Thiel really did exhaust all the conventional methods. First, he hired a famous New York media fixer to arrange introductions, to try and humanize him to the Gawker editors. That totally failed. Then, he donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Committee to Protect Journalists to show good faith. Failed again. He even explored just buying the company outright to shut it down, but Denton wasn't selling. Every single one of these standard steps proved totally useless against Gawker's model.
And this leads to a fascinating dynamic in Silicon Valley. The standard response from Thiel's powerful peers was simply, well, there is nothing we can do. There was this widespread feeling of total powerlessness against Gawker. But Thiel is what you'd call a high-agency person. He's someone who tries to bend reality to his will rather than just accepting defeat. He point-blank refused to accept this powerlessness, and honestly, that refusal is what birthed the actual plot.
All right, Section 5, Assembling the Shadow Team. To pull off something this massive, Thiel obviously couldn't do it alone. But before we meet his specialized allies, let's just clearly define our terms here. Our source material defines a conspiracy as determined, coordinated action done in secret that aims to disrupt the status quo or accomplish some aim. We're not talking about tinfoil hats and aliens. We are talking about a very clear, strategic framework executed by highly motivated professionals.
So let's set the scene. It's Berlin, April 2011. Thiel is having dinner with his hyper-ambitious 26-year-old, referred to in the source only as Mr. A. Sitting at this high-end restaurant, Mr. A pitches a structured long-term plan. He basically opens a figurative briefcase and proposes creating a shell company. The goal? Secretly fund lawsuits against Gawker on behalf of other people they had wronged.
And the initial budget Thiel commits to this shadow op? $10 million. Just let that sink in for a second. By writing that one check, the abstract concept of a billionaire's feud instantly became terrifyingly real and incredibly well-funded. But why did Thiel say yes to this? Well, it really came down to one decisive quote. When Thiel expressed that common Silicon Valley sentiment that there's nothing we can do, Mr. Ash just looked at him and said, "Peter, if everyone thought that way, what would the world look like?" It was the perfect pitch. It completely preyed on Thiel's deep-seated ambition to shape the world rather than just letting it shape him.
Now, to make this work, the operation relied heavily on compartmentalization. They needed a hatchet man, a lawyer, so Mr. A recruits a Beverly Hills attorney named Charles Harder. But here is the absolute genius of the setup. Harder is brought in to execute the legal strategy, but he remains completely compartmentalized. He has absolutely no idea Peter Thiel is the one funding him. He's just told a group of wealthy individuals is backing the play. So Harder just gets to work finding cases, totally blind to the true puppet master pulling the strings.
Fast forward through years of secret legal maneuvering to the astonishing climax of the conspiracy. Harder eventually takes on the case of professional wrestler Hulk Hogan, whose privacy had been severely violated by Gawker, and the jury verdict? A staggering $115 million. This was it, the massive, lethal blow that finally brought Gawker to its knees and forced them right into bankruptcy. The shadow war was over. The conspiracy had succeeded.
Which leaves us with a final, really provocative thought to take away from this explainer today. Would a world with more of these secret conspiracies be a nightmare or something better? Is it terrifying that a single billionaire can secretly destroy a media company? Or is it a necessary check against entities that act with total impunity? I'll leave you to weigh what it really means to wield such immense power from the shadows. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning the mechanics of power around you.